Jonathan is the strongest Joestar. The strongest Joestar is something that has been debated throughout the start of JoJo's. Every time another Joestar is shown on the screen, everybody tends to compare their abilities and strength. For a long period of time, people thought that Johnny Joestar Giorno Giovanna was his strongest, while in reality it was always Jonathan. This is something that the author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has been pushing for a while. I've already made a why Jonathan Joestar is the strongest Joestar video prior, but I wasn't completely satisfied with the quality of the previous video, so with this one I'll try to be as clear and concise as I possibly can. If you clicked on the video with the sole intention of me munching, feel free to take a bleach infused jello shot while you type out that essay in the comment section below. But without further ado, so starting off, Jonathan scales to Dio Brando, that is the pinnacle of all Dios. There is a more detailed explanation on why he is the strongest out of all the iterations in this other Dio video that I made, which will be linked in the description below. But I will summarize it now. Dio in part 1 is logically stronger than Dio in part 3. And I will list 3 reasons for that right now. He is stated to be weaker than he is in part 1 Vampire State, and he frequently makes the assertion that he needs the blood of innocence to regain strength that he lost. All his vampiric abilities are superior in part 1. Dio in part 3 needs to kill people in order to heal himself from characters around him when taking lethal damage. After his leg got cut off and he tagged a punch from Jotaro through his stomach, he needed a civilian to heal himself, while in part 1, he can heal himself from getting cut off in half and his limbs thrown around without the need to suck anyone's blood. Dio in part 3 also doesn't have access to the abilities that he had in part 1, where we see it was extremely needed in some situations. For example, against Jotaro, where he needed to come close but it was really skeptical on whether or not he's alive, so he decided to take a long metal object to kill him. If he did have the abilities where he had in part 1, he could have killed him with his sting eyes, not needed to move a single inch. The stingrays in part 1 aren't weak at all, as we can see in part 1 where Dio is able to cut an entire piece of a tower. And finally, number 3, and this is a long one, the body that Dio possesses isn't his own, which means that regardless of him consuming innocent lives, it wouldn't compare to the state in part 1. In part 1, Dio has been experimenting with his body for weeks, during which he did nothing but consume lives, becoming at least 3 times stronger from the first time we saw him. However, in part 3, after consuming Joseph's life, Dio claims that he has gotten stronger. This is simply an exaggerated claim due to him being under the influence, as he describes it as being the greatest high ever, and that he's the strongest ever. Dio hasn't physically surpassed Jonathan's strength from part 1, because he wouldn't have experienced how the body felt during Jonathan's time. Jonathan's physical body gets amplified when he uses Hamon, which makes him vastly stronger than his normal body. As Zeppeli claims, Hamon strengthens every cell in your body. Whether or not you were to interpret Dio talking about Jonathan's body, or the fact that he's talking about his current part 3 body, as it's a completely different body, is unclear. He asserts that the body is the strongest he has ever felt due to stat energy that he has to spare, along with the fact that the body Dio has in part 3 is different from Jonathan's body, as Dio is adding his head to Jonathan's body, which by definition is a completely different physical structure, which aligns with the definition of body. So what he's saying is that the body in part 3 is a different body from both Dio and Jonathan. It's a mix of both, kind of like Darth Vader. The context of this statement relates to how he can feel stand energy surging through his body, allowing him to stop time longer than he's been before, and then proceeds to use the maximum output of his stand energy and kicks Jotaro. So to summarize this whole thing, although Dio logically could be stronger than Jonathan's normal body, Jonathan's body is extremely weak without the use of Hamon, as Hamon amplifies your entire body massively. So Jonathan in part 1 with Hamon should be stronger than Dio in part 3. And since Jonathan is massively stronger than Dio in part 3, he should also be massively faster, as Hamon amplifies every cell in your body, which means that you'd have an easier time kicking yourself off the ground. Dio in part 3 and Jotaro in part 3 are kinda relative. They constantly go back and forward, and Dio is slightly weaker than Jotaro. Jonathan in part 1 should scale to Dio in part 1 as well, which both scale massively above the characters in part 3, as I explained earlier. So Jonathan should scale to a massively stronger Dio than the one that Jotaro fought, which would likely put him above Jotaro in terms of strength. I'm not saying that Jotaro would lose to Jonathan in a fight. All I'm saying is, if both of them were to punch a wall, Jonathan would do way more damage to that wall than Star Platinum would. So Since Jonathan Joestar is stronger than Jotaro, he's logically stronger than every other character as well, talking about the Joestar crew. Jotaro is massively stronger than Josuke. Jotaro is way stronger than Josuke, and it's even stated in part 4 that he's the strongest, fastest, and most precise user around. It's stated 2 times actually. But Koichi also makes the assertion that Jotaro is way stronger than anything he's ever experienced before. And Josuke acknowledges the fact that Star Platinum is both invincible and the strongest. But yeah, we'll be circling back to that. In part 4 it stated that Jotaro is the strongest. Although I just brought that scan up, I do need it for Giorno. He's stated to be the strongest and fastest and most precise ever, which means that he's stronger than Diavolo as well, as Diavolo was present in part 4. Because in the timeline, after part 3, Polnareff did fight Diavolo a couple of years after part 3. And part 4 is around 10 something years after part 3. This would make a weaker Jotaro way stronger than Diavolo. And if he's stronger than Diavolo, then he's also stronger than GR. As in the epitaph, which is stated to be true, whatever he sees is fated to happen. In the epitaph, it's stated that King Crimson is both way stronger and faster than GR. A single punch was even able to kill him. Although GR ends up killing Diavolo, he doesn't really disagree with what happened in the epitaph and stated that it was indeed reality. All he's doing is just denying him the truth. So this is GR acknowledging the fact that he is both stronger, faster. It would have killed him if it wasn't for the fact of RTZ. I know I haven't brought up Joseph yet, but I feel like considering that Dio is way stronger than Joseph, I didn't really need to. But for the sake of the video, I am going to bring that up. So Jotaro around the midpoint of the show is stated to be the strongest stand known to man. Everybody who's around Jotaro at the time, including villains, acknowledge the fact that he's the strongest. So I hope that answers it. So Jonathan versus Johnny. So Jonathan is way stronger than Jotaro, as I explained earlier, but for a lot of people who tend to rat, they do believe the fact that Jonathan in part 7 does have infinite damage. Although there's a possibility, it's more of the fact that he does have his ability which produces infinite power over time, which means that he does not have it currently. It's explained as after he punches somebody, the person in question will just continuously spin throughout infinitely. I'm gonna indulge this conversation and this argument real quick. I made a video on Jotaro vs Goku where I went in depth explaining why anyone who scales to Jotaro in terms of strength in the ballpark would have infinite power. When I'm talking about infinite power, I'm talking about the fact that these characters would have infinite AP, as in high universal AP, because these characters would be able to produce infinite power with each punch. Assuming that he has to be shown that these characters are able to produce infinite power with every punch is an argument from ignorance, but we can logically assume that these characters can produce this amount of strength with each punch as they scale to Pucci in terms of strength. Jotaro is able to harm Pucci, and because Pucci is able to endure the entire universe being destroyed and recreated, he should have universal durability. And it all just circles back to Jonathan. So this goes back to the wall analogy. If Johnny and Jonathan were to punch a wall, Jonathan would do way more damage to that wall. Johnny would likely catch up, but that would be over time. And now for Josuke. Josuke is not strong. He's pretty lame. I've talked about this in a lot of videos. Really recommend watching the Josuke vs Goku video. So now that we're done with the scaling, although Araki never explicitly said that Jonathan is the strongest Joestar, he doesn't have to say it. He doesn't have to make a flat-out statement saying that Jonathan is the strongest Joestar, but rather he did it throughout the narrative. It is narratively implied that Jonathan is the strongest, as I've just shown you guys his line of scaling. So in other words, he did kind of say that he was the strongest. He doesn't necessarily have to make the claim, but he indirectly made the assertion. So yeah, Jonathan Joestar is the strongest Joestar ever. If you guys liked the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and join the Discord in the description below. And peace.